Somewhere in your house right now, or maybe earlier today, or tomorrow morning at 7:45, a small life is going to watch you walk away. They won't understand where you're going. They won't understand when you're coming back. The only thing they'll understand is this: the most important person in their world just disappeared again. And then they'll do something most owners never get to see. They'll wait.
Be a good boy. I love
For
you.
9 hours, sometimes 10. And during those hours, the animal curled up in your living room won't be the same one you kissed on the forehead before you grabbed your keys. They'll become someone else, a quieter version, held together by nothing but the sound of your specific engine somewhere down the street, the faint smell of your coat still draped over the chair, and a kind of faith so ancient it doesn't live in their brain anymore. It lives in their bones. And when you finally turn back onto your street, it takes less than 4 seconds. Not the key in the lock, not the door swinging open, the sound of your car from the far end of the road, before you've even made the turn. You are not their owner. You are the event their nervous system has been waiting for since 8:47 this morning. Most people think they know what their dog does all day. They picture something peaceful, right? A slow morning on the couch, a lazy walk to the water bowl, a patch of sunlight sliding across the floor while the hours pass. They come home to a quiet house, shoes still where they left them, cushions undisturbed, and they think, good day. Everything was fine. These are gentle lies we tell ourselves. Not because we're careless, because the dog makes it so easy to believe them. And the most seductive lie of all: an intact house means an intact inner world. But silence isn't the same as stillness. A dog who's stopped making noise hasn't necessarily found peace. They've just found a different way to carry what they're feeling. The house looks the same. Your dog doesn't. Not on the inside. Not in the slow, invisible chemistry of their blood and breath. We just never learn to read the difference. Most owners go their whole lives without knowing what's actually happening in those rooms. They love their dogs deeply. They worry about them. And still, they miss the one truth about their dog's interior world that would change everything. Not because they're not paying attention, because no one ever showed them what to look for. By the end of this video, you're gonna see your dog the way researchers see them, the way 15,000 years of shared evolution shaped them to be seen. And you'll understand why those silent hours aren't empty at all, but one of the most extraordinary things any animal has ever done for another species. In 2010, researchers at the University of Milan placed cameras inside the homes of 23 dogs and did something deceptively simple. They left. No long goodbye at the door, no drawn-out ritual. They just walked out and watched. What the
While
footage
one
showed
wait in cycling
rewrote how
distress,
behaviorists
the other
understood what it means
exemplifies
to be left
anchored
behind.
trust, resting
Vocalization,
patiently.
barking, whining. That low, sustained howl some dogs do began on average 3 minutes and 15 seconds after the owner left. Not 5 minutes, not 10. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. By the 7-minute mark, dogs prone to distress had already moved through their first wave. The shoes were at risk. The corner of the rug had already been found. But the more quietly devastating finding came later. After that first burst, the noise stopped. From outside the apartment, a neighbor would have heard nothing. A camera with no audio would have shown a dog lying on the floor, calm, apparently settled. And yet, the body told a completely different story. Panting elevated.
She
Heart
reaches
rate
the door
still
and
high.
stands rigid, the tail beginning to
The
move for the
whole
first time all day.
physiological
It
machinery
is the
of
4-second
distress
recognition before
running
the key hits the
silently
lock.
beneath a surface that looked like rest. And then every 23 to 28 minutes, without fail, a new wave. A fresh surge of movement or sound, followed by another quiet stretch. Then another surge. Not settling. Cycling. Researchers at the Swedish University of
began
Agricultural
15,000
Sciences
years
watched
of
a separate
companionship,
group dogs with no
forged in
history
the
of
warmth of the
separation
fire
issues,
against the
left alone
prehistoric
for
night.
up to 4 hours. These dogs spent roughly 97% of their time in passive, resting behavior. Not
In this remarkable
distressed,
grave from the
not
Magdalenian
bored,
period, we find the
just
oldest
waiting.
evidence of a deep
the way
emotional
only
bond
a
between
truly
humans and a
anchored
dog.
animal can wait, without bracing, without checking, without that silent, exhausting labor of hope on a loop. The difference between those two groups wasn't breed, it wasn't age, it was barely even genetics. It was
Please
something
finalize
built
the report
slowly,
by end of day Tuesday,
over months
ensuring all data points are
years.
included in the appendix.
in the small daily accumulation of what a dog has learned to expect when the door closes. One group had enough evidence, the door always opens again. The other group was still in the middle of learning that, still cycling, still checking, still doing invisible, heartbreaking work that looks, from the outside, like absolutely nothing at all. Let me tell you what that footage actually means. Not in clinical terms, in the language of what it feels like to love something you can't explain yourself to. Every 23 minutes, your dog isn't having an episode. They're placing a bet, a small, renewable act of faith that this time, when they look toward the door, you might be there. And when you're not, they don't give up. They reset. They wait another 23 minutes and try again. Hour after hour. In a house that doesn't answer them, they keep making that bet. Because stopping, just stopping, is something their body doesn't know how to choose. We call it anxiety. And in clinical terms, sure, that's what it is. But the word flattens something that's actually enormous. Anxiety implies malfunction, something wrong in the wiring. What those cameras were actually recording wasn't malfunction. It was devotion expressed in the only form available to a creature who can't write you a letter, can't leave a voicemail, can't sit with uncertainty the way we sometimes manage to. So they pace, they check, they listen, they try again. Your dog isn't waiting because they're broken. They're waiting because they love you in a way that doesn't know how to do anything else. And here's the thing to understand how that love became so total, so biological, so old it predates written language. You have to go back much further than any camera study. You have to go back about 15,000 years to a burial site in Bonn Oberkassel, Germany, where archaeologists uncovered something that stopped them cold. Beneath the earth, alongside the remains of a man and a woman, lay the bones of a young dog. The dog had been ill for weeks before it died, too sick to hunt, too sick to work, too sick to offer anything a practical partnership might require. And yet someone had fed it, carried it, kept it warm through the dying, and then buried it among their own, with the same care, the same intention, the same grief they gave to the humans beside it. That's the oldest known evidence of what we actually share with dogs. Not utility, not training, tenderness. Researchers at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest spent years trying to understand what happens neurologically when a dog looks at the person they're bonded to. What they found wasn't what anyone expected. The neural activation patterns in a dog's brain during that gaze are almost identical in structure to the patterns in a human mother's brain when she looks at her newborn. Not similar in a loose way, identical in the architecture, what lights up, what releases, what floods the system. Oxytocin moves in both directions across that gaze, from you to them, from them back to you, in a hormonal loop that, until that research, scientists believed existed only between members of the same species caring for their young. Dogs crossed that line. Think about that for a second. At some point in those 15,000 years, they evolved a nervous system capable of doing something no other animal on Earth has managed with the same depth or consistency. They learned to attach to a creature that doesn't look like them, doesn't smell like them, doesn't communicate like them, and to attach so completely that their stress hormones began to synchronize with ours. Across months, across years. In 2019, researchers at Linköping University in Sweden measured long-term cortisol in 58 dog owner pairs, captured in hair samples reflecting months of accumulation, not just a single bad day. The levels moved together. Stressed owner, stressed dog. Calm owner, calm dog. And when researchers looked at the direction of that relationship, which one was driving the other, the answer was clear. The owner's cortisol predicted the dog's, not the reverse. Your dog isn't just fond of you. They're biologically tuned to you in a way that took 15,000 years to build. And every morning when you leave, that tuning has to hold itself together in your absence like a string still vibrating after the bow has lifted away. So which kind of waiter is your dog? Because the cameras show us they don't all wait the same way. There are roughly 4 patterns, and almost every dog you've ever loved falls somewhere into one of them. The first is the sentinel. This is the dog who finds a position, the window, the top of the stairs, the corner of the hallway where the front door is just barely visible, and holds it. They don't pace much. They don't make much noise. They just watch, with a patience that looks almost meditative from the outside. The way some dogs will sit so still, you'd almost think they were a piece of furniture. Except for the ears. The ears never stop moving. If you've ever come home to find your dog already standing at the door before the key even touched the lock, that's your sentinel. They didn't hear you just then. They've been listening for you, in a low, continuous hum, since the moment you left. The second is the cycler. This is the dog from the Milan footage. Distress, then quiet, then distress again every 23 to 28 minutes for the full stretch of your absence. If you've ever come home to a dog who seems tired in a way a nap doesn't explain, whose eyes carry a flatness that lifts only slowly as the evening settles in, that's your cycler. They've been running an emotional marathon in your living room all day, and you were the finish line they couldn't see. The third is the sleeper. And this one is the hardest to recognize because they look the most fine. This is the dog who's gone quiet, not because they've found peace, but because the system has been running so long at such intensity that it's shifted into a kind of conservation mode. A 2019 cortisol study found that severely anxious dogs sometimes measured lower stress hormones than calmer dogs. Not because they were less distressed, because the stress response itself had started to burn out. The dog that never seems bothered is sometimes the dog carrying the most. If that sounds like your dog, please talk to your vet. The fourth is the anchored. This is the dog who has accumulated enough evidence through hundreds of small repetitions of you leaving and coming back that their nervous system has actually updated. They rest without bracing. They wait without checking. They're not less loving than the other three. They're just held by a deeper trust. One that was built the only way trust ever gets built in any living creature. Slowly. Through proof. Repeated until it became belief. And most dogs aren't one type forever. They move between these patterns depending on the season. A disruption in routine, or sometimes just the small shift in your energy that they registered before you were even aware of it yourself. Now, here's the part that most of the dog training industry gets quietly, consistently wrong. The goal, we're told, is to make your dog more independent, to teach them to self-soothe, to reduce their attachment to you specifically so they can have an inner life that doesn't require your presence to feel whole. The ideal outcome in this framing is a dog who barely notices when you leave. But stop and think about what that actually means. A dog who doesn't notice when you leave isn't a dog who's healed. It's a dog who's disconnected. And disconnection isn't the same thing as peace. It looks like peace. It produces intact cushions in a quiet house. But something has gone quiet inside the dog that was never meant to go quiet. That thread, 15,000 years old, that pulls toward one specific person and doesn't know how to do otherwise. What the research actually shows is that the dogs who recover most fully aren't the ones who learn to need their person less. They're the ones who learn that needing is safe. That the door opens again. That the waiting ends. A 229-dog clinical trial looked at the combination of fluoxetine and structured behavior modification and found 73% improvement in separation-related distress, compared to 51% for behavior modification alone. And what the medication was doing in those dogs wasn't numbing the attachment. It wasn't turning down the love. It was giving the brain enough stability to hold the love without the panic, to form a new belief that absence is temporary, that return is certain, that missing you is something the nervous system can survive. The missing isn't the problem. It never was. The problem is a nervous system that hasn't yet learned that missing you is something it can live through. And that is a very different thing to fix. I want to speak directly to the part of you that's been carrying something quiet through this entire video. You know the feeling. It lives in that moment the lock clicks, and you stand on the other side of the door for just 1 second longer than you need to. It finds you at your desk at 2 in the afternoon, mid-sentence, mid-meeting. When a thought crosses without any warning at all, I wonder what she's doing right now. Whether she's at the window, whether she's found that one spot on the rug she always goes back to. And it's there when you come home and kneel down in the entryway, bag still on your shoulder, coat still on, and your hands are already reaching before you've even said anything. And you whisper something you weren't planning to say. Something that sounds a lot like, I know, I'm sorry. That guilt is real, I'm not going to tell you it isn't, but I want to offer you something that's more true than the guilt, older than it, and so much kinder. You are not the reason for their distress. You are the reason they have anything to wait for at all. Think about what the research has actually shown us. A dog who cycles every 23 minutes is cycling towards something, towards someone. A dog who stands at the window for 9 hours straight is standing there because that window faces the direction you drove away in. A dog whose cortisol rises the moment you leave has a nervous system that was built slowly, over years, through 10,000 small moments of you coming back entirely in your presence. That architecture doesn't exist in a dog who is never loved with the kind of constancy you've given them. The waiting isn't a symptom of something you did wrong. The waiting is the direct evidence of everything you did right. The waiting is the love. There's no version of this where the dog gets the love without the waiting. Those two things aren't separate. They're the same thing, seen from different sides of the door. And that small private grief you carry every morning, the one that whispers, "I wish I didn't have to leave them." That's not weakness. It's not neurosis. It's not something to fix or talk yourself out of. It's the same bond, running in reverse, inside you. Two nervous systems that learned each other so thoroughly that absence registers as a low-grade ache in both directions. You feel it at 2 in the afternoon. They feel it every 23 minutes. You're not their burden. You are their whole orientation toward the day. The thing the entire day is organized around, the before and the after. The reason the hours have a shape at all, you did not break them. You did not make them this way. You made them this loved. Now, because love is also practical, and because the most useful thing you can do with everything you now know is actually do something with it, there are 3 signs worth learning to recognize. Not to frighten you, just because awareness, held gently, is its own form of care. The first is a dog who stopped greeting you when you come home. The dog who used to be at the door, maybe doing that whole body wiggle, maybe just standing there with her tail going, and now stays on the couch, glances up, doesn't rise, has gone quiet in a way that looks like indifference, but probably isn't. This can be the sleeper pattern, showing up a nervous system that's been running so long in distress that it's shifted into conservation mode, saving whatever's left. If you've noticed this change in your dog, please talk to your vet. Not because something is definitely wrong, because you deserve to know either way. The second is repetitive self-soothing, licking the same paw over and over, the same patch of fur on the foreleg, the same corner of the carpet in a loop that has nothing to do with anything physical. This is often what unprocessed stress looks like when it has nowhere else to go. It's quiet. It's easy to miss, especially if you're not home to see it. And it tends to increase on the days you're gone longest. The third is a change in appetite that follows a pattern. A dog who eats normally on weekends and barely touches her bowl on weekdays. A dog who leaves the food untouched on the days your schedule runs long, then cleans the bowl the moment you're back on a normal schedule. She's not being fussy. She's telling you something very specific about which hours feel safe and which hours feel like waiting with no visible end. And the simplest intervention, the one with the most consistent evidence behind it, and the lowest barrier to starting tonight, right after this, is just this: build a longer history of return. Walk to your front door and come back in. Touch the handle and come back in. Step outside for 90 seconds. Stand on the porch and come back in. Do it so slowly, so unhurriedly, that your dog's nervous system has no chance to spike in the space between your leaving and your return. I know how that sounds. Standing at your own front door and walking back inside does not feel like training. It feels like nothing. It might feel a little ridiculous. But what you're actually doing is providing repetition after repetition of the same simple sequence you leave. You come back until that sequence stops being two separate events in the body of your dog and becomes one, not departure and return, just the rhythm of someone who always comes back. Researchers have found that 40 minutes tends to be the inflection point. Once a dog can move through roughly 40 minutes of absence without physiological distress, the capacity to handle longer stretches, 2 hours, 4 hours, a full workday tends to follow relatively quickly. Not because 40 minutes is magic, because by then, the dog has accumulated enough evidence to start updating what they expect. And in a nervous system, expectation is everything. It's the whole ball game. So tomorrow morning, when your particular goodbye happens at 7:45 or 8:15 or whatever time the door closes behind you, you'll know what's waiting on the other side of it. You'll know the silence isn't empty. You'll know that somewhere in your living room, a small wave of hope is already gathering, will crest and settle. Crest and settle. Every 23 minutes for as long as it takes. You'll know what those 4 seconds feel like inside their body when your car finally turns back onto your street. The chemistry releasing, the whole nervous system reorganizing itself around your presence. The way a plant turns back toward light after a long day of clouds. That tail. Those eyes. That sound some dogs make, that isn't quite a bark and isn't quite a whine, just this urgent, relieved, full body hello. That means you're back, you're back, you're finally back. That's not a burden you're carrying. That is one of the most astonishing things that has ever happened between two different species in the history of this planet. And it's happening in your house every single day. With an animal who crossed 15,000 years of evolution to find their way to exactly this to you, specifically, and no one else, you didn't break them. You didn't make them this way. You made them this loved. If you have a moment tonight, sit with your dog the way a researcher would. Not to fix anything, not to assess or intervene, just to watch. Notice where they position themselves in relation to you, whether they're closer to the door or closer to wherever you've settled. Notice how their breathing shifts when you stand up to refill your glass of water, whether something in them quietly reorganizes. Tracking the small movements of the person their nervous system spent all day waiting for. The way she sighs when she finally lies down next to you. The way his ears swivel toward the sound of your voice, even when you're talking to someone else. They've been telling you who you are to them in this language every single day. You're only just now learning to read it. And if you've ever caught your dog looking at you in that particular way, that long, slow, unblinking gaze that lasts just a few seconds longer than seems strictly necessary, That's the next story I want to tell you. Because that look isn't random. It isn't simply habit, and it isn't simply affection.